I wrote about my thoughts about Champions Queue in a Google document. Agree/disagree. I wanted to share why I wasn't playing Champions Queue recently and how I want to get back into it for different practice environments. I didn't feel obligated to write this, but I felt that it was important. Do you feel guilty about not playing Champions Queue? Yes, of course. I think about it a lot of times when Jojo Pune and Kaori play Champions Queue, grind for a long time every day. It's open and ask myself, how can they do that? For me, I generally wasn't the biggest grinder for solo queue. My motivation for League was not good and still is not that good for both solo queue and Champions Queue, but that's not an excuse. I'm a pro player, so I should be looking to become the best version of myself as a player that I can be, whether that be by watching VODs, Champions Queue, solo queue, 1v1/2v2s drills, or scrimming with my team. So far, I do watch VODs of other... This is a bit of like a... The only real like thing is that he's open and honest that his motivation for grinding League is not great, right? Like that's like the only thing I'm really getting out of this. I think like the rest of it is just kind of a fluff piece. You know, every single pro player is going to watch VODs. Every single pro player is going to play, you know, scrims and additional practice, but some don't play any additional practice and they just, you know, fall behind. 1v1 and 2v2 drills, I don't understand how 1v1s are ever going to be a factor in 80 carries. Scrimming with your team, this is literally like saying, like, as a pro player, you know, I am brushing my teeth. Like, well, actually scrimming with your team is more required than brushing your teeth. Okay, play solo queue with my friend. I guess I'll read everything. Other pro AD/LCK/LPL/LEC games and play solo queue with my friend, which we duo queue together and sometimes play bot lane and support the practice combo lanes such as Lucian Nami or any champion that I feel like I want more to practice more of, such as Zeri, Lucian, Xayah with him. I think that's actually that's a good point that I think hasn't really been raised yet with Champions Queue, and that would be that in solo queue, before you hit Masters, you're able to duo queue. If you have an account under Masters, then you can duo queue with a friend, and you can get a feel for certain duos, how much damage you can deal. You know, what is the absolute limit of this bot lane? Like, how does it feel at level 1? I know that you're going to be playing, obviously, people are going to say, like, oh, but you're not playing against pro players. But I think it's actually, I will definitely give Danny some credit here, that this is truly a good way to practice things for the very first time. Like, let's say you've never played Lucian Nami before. You could watch VODs, sure. You could play 2v2 drills with somebody, sure. But, like, one of the best ways, alongside that, to learn and get a good feel for the champ and to get a feel for the duo is just to jump into a solo queue game with a friend and practice it. And I think it's a really big shame for support and AD specifically, just for those two roles specifically, because you're not able to duo queue with somebody and pick a duo that you want to practice in solo queue anymore. That doesn't exist in Champions Queue. That only really exists in solo queue, because obviously you don't want to be that guy in Champions Queue who's like, please, just play this. Like, you don't know if you don't know if that person is comfortable with it. So good points. I think if you're trying out a completely new bot duo that you're not comfortable with, solo queue is a good playground to fuck around. Because think about it this way, guys. You walk into Champions Queue and you play something for the very first time and you want a limit test, you might feed. There's like a 60% chance that you're gonna feed because you're not playing at your normal level. Subjecting your Champions Queue teammates to that doesn't feel good and honestly feels a bit awkward. So totally understand this part. I ended up not using Champions Queue because of 2 points. First, I dislike using comms with other players that are not my friends or teammates. So even though it is a huge advantage to use comms, I wouldn't like doing it because I'd feel uncomfortable and I would like to play the game thinking mostly to myself, as that's how I perform decently well most of the time. Maybe I won't have to say much in comms or just don't talk and listen to them. But even then, I feel like that in itself is not great to play with from a teammate's perspective, like another support. So he's saying that he doesn't feel comfortable with the comms, and if he totally could be that guy that doesn't say anything or doesn't listen to his teammates, like deafened or muted, but that feels really bad for his teammates. I agree with that. It doesn't feel great, and this is where like I'm losing him a little bit on this thing, because now you're just making excuses for why you don't like the practice or why the practice doesn't fit your personal comforts, why you don't like that type of practice, why it's not as enjoyable or as fun for you. Now you're delving into the territory of, like, you know, it's just not my cup of tea, it's just not my preference to do this Champions Queue thing. And that's where you're going to lose a lot of people by saying something like this, because this is just a flat out excuse. You go to any other player in an Eastern region, playing in LCK, playing in LPL, they're fighting for their life, they're fighting for their spot, and you tell them, like, yo, there's this slightly more uncomfortable, but way more efficient way of practicing. you have to communicate with people that it might get awkward. You might have to, you know, listen to people who you're not that comfortable with listening to, or talk to them, and they'll be like, "Holy shit, sign me up!" Right? That's not a good excuse for not doing the better form of practice. Just because you don't like it, you should be doing it doesn't matter. You should be doing the best practice that you can do. I give him +1, -1 so far on this. Like think about this. Do you guys think that Shen Yi is in his comfort zone learning English? Do you guys think that Shen Yi would, you know, he's communicating in his second language. People are obviously going to have some awkward communication problems with Shen Yi. They're not going to understand him. He's not going to understand them. You know, jokes are going to go over his head. Do you guys think that that's comfortable? Obviously not. This is just the best way for him to practice because he wants to be the best player possible. It's not about enjoyment. It's about competing. Secondly, solo queue is just a more solo environment, obviously. I'm enjoying playing ADCs that I want to practice. Some I mentioned before, but not just those 3. Rather than just picking the best slot ADC every game to try hard for LPN wins. Jinx and Aphelios come to mind in previous patches. And now I'm getting better at those champions, I can possibly practice them in scrim games now as well, if I want to, and be more overall well suited to playing them on stage games as well. Drills also help with this, getting better at certain champions, but I think it's a more awkward environment without a mid laner or jungler on the team to influence the lane. Instead, it's a strictly 2v2 AD carry and support. He doesn't want to play the most meta AD carries in Champions Queue and try hard. I don't really understand the point. You don't have to. You can just ban them. You know, both teams have bans, and realistically, the meta AD carries are the ones that you're going to be playing on. So I've always really disliked it when people say that, like, oh, I don't need any more practice on this champion, I'm already insane at it, because usually anytime a player that thinks that they can't learn anything more on that champion and it's their, you know, 500th Orianna game or 500th Jinx game, there's nothing to be improved on. This is not like a really play to mastery type of mindset, you know. That doesn't feel good. Champions Queue definitely doesn't force you to pick the best in slot AD carry. You can just give it up and play something else, or you can ban it and play something that's not a normal matchup. I mean, almost every single Champions Queue game that you guys have watched, do you see people fighting over bans? Half the time we're just like, what do we want to ban, guys? And then there's like 30 seconds of us deliberating on it. I'm not really feeling this as a valid reason at all. Not only do you not have to play the most meta AD carries in Champions Queue, even if you did, that would be the most beneficial thing for your career. Like, when I played competitively, do you guys think that I give a shit if I played my 10th Ashe game of the day? My 10th Jinx game? My 10th Caitlyn game? Ezreal game? Whatever. Like, we're here to play the matchups that are the most popular and the most likely to happen on stage. Obviously, you're not going to care, right? You're here to improve at League. And I feel like a person who feels like they're not going to improve because they play their most played champion, that's a mindset issue. That's not a Champions Queue problem. So the last one says, will you play Champions Queue now that pros have said it's important for LCS/Academy players to keep playing it for a higher level of practice? I consider it a lot, yes. I want NA as a region to get better and for us to do very good as pro players, so I want to play it more often, but I think there's other valid reasons to not just specifically grind Champions Queue every day from 6 p.m. to 1 a.m. Oh, here we go again, guys. I'm worried reading the rest of this. Solo queue can have a good practice for just yourself, and even though team can be fucking trash, you can play to get better at whatever you think you need to get better by yourself without caring about the results. Champions Queue, however, I think is good to have teamwork, and it's more macro play focused, so it's good to play for the competitive side of practice. Good for amateur player that aren't used to playing more competitive-esque games, so I will look to play more Champions Queue for sure. I think you made one good point about the duo queue, and that being something that Champions Queue doesn't have. Honestly, most pro players don't have access to it because their main accounts on live server are above masters, so they don't have access to duo queue on live server either. However, Danny must have an account that he is allowed to duo on and just consistently tanks below masters, so that way he can actually do it. I don't really see a lot of positives. Well, really, I hardly see any positives to solo queue. He's talking about Champions Queue being better for more macro play focused, and in my opinion, and in almost everyone's opinion, Champions Queue is just better mechanical practice as well, because you're not playing on 50 to 60 ping, you're playing on the exact same ping that you're playing official matches on. Also, how can you say that it's good mechanical practice to play against people who are just not very good at the game? You're playing against pro players with professional level mechanics, so you're being challenged on a mechanical level that doesn't exist in solo queue. I just don't really understand. The Champions Queue is more macro focused. It definitely has better macro, but it also has better. It's not mutually exclusive. Just because the macro is better in Champions Queue doesn't make the mechanical practice worse. It actually is just both better. I don't really understand what he was trying to say there.